All right, good afternoon, everybody. So one thing that Kip didn't say in my intro is I may or may not have a couple of experience in this subject, and one of them includes Jeremy. So that's why we're kind of tag teaming this together, I think. Before we dive into the subject, it's a 30-minute block. So it's kind of a short presentation about converting to a wildfire, but that doesn't mean that it's not important. It's not if, it's when that it's going to happen. So we have to look at it in that respect. So we have to plan for it. Plan for it, hope it never happens, but if it does happen, we're more prepared for it. One of the key things in that planning that's important to us as prescribed fire practitioners and other practitioners that are working with us, but it's just as important to other partners. Could be townships, municipalities, local government, state government. It's not just about us as fire practitioners. The more that we're dialed in with it, the better it's going to be for us. If we have to convert a wildfire to a wildfire, and it's not going well, it's gonna look bad, and it's going to reflect entirely on the whole prescribed fire community. So it's not just about us, it's about others. As we go through the presentation, the beginning parts of it, we're going to highlight some of the parts of the Prescribed Burning Act, and then the standards that Pennsylvania has enacted. And then we have a couple of examples. Going through the standards of Prescribed Fire Act, it's not the whole, the entire documents, it's just pieces and parts of it. Just remember that we have to follow what's in those standards and in the Prescribed Fire Act. So, if we stay within those bounds, then we're going to be a lot better off. We're going to be better for it. So the first slide that I brought up here it's more about keywords. The keywords that I highlighted are controlled and uncontrolled. So under the controlled for prescribed burn, so this is an excerpt of the Prescribed Burning Act of what defines a prescribed fire. So it specifically states in there that it's a planned controlled event. So we are in control of it. Versus a wildfire, it's an uncontrolled, unplanned, fire. So there's two different terminologies that that I just wanted to highlight. That we need to plan for the uncontrolled to be prepared for it, but so in the Prescribed Burning Practices Act. So one of the first things in the act that it talks about are standards. So the act states that DCNR is responsible to develop some standards. So developing those standards, DCNR had to reach out to other partners, other agencies, the Prescribed Fire Council, the whole gamut to develop these these standards for the state and how we are going to operate. Within the standards, it says that it must contain what is required of a burn plan. So what are the required elements in the content of a prescribed fire plan, prescribed burn plan? And that the standards are supposed to be as comparable as possible to the NWCG, National Wildfire Coordinating Group standards, to the best extent possible. All right, so now we roll into responsibilities. So the standards also, they identify who's responsible for what. So the two that I identified in here for this topic are the agency administrator and the burn boss. So the agency administrator, that's whoever controls, manages, that chunk of ground. Wherever we're burning, whoever is in charge of that piece of ground, whoever owns it, They are the agency administrator. Could be a district forester, a park supervisor, a park superintendent, Fish and Wildlife Service, whoever it is, the agency administrator, they're the ones that are ultimately responsible for that piece of ground. And it states in there that the agency administrator has to report any wildfire from a prescribed burn to the Bureau of Forestry. And then the burn boss. So I highlighted a word there with the burn boss, availability. So the burn boss has to confirm the availability of contingency resources. We're gonna kind of talk about contingency resources a little bit. And within the, the contingency resources, and the reason I highlighted availability is, are your contingency resources truly available? I've been parts of prescribed burns, and some of the ones that I've written where, honestly, my contingency resources probably were not available. So if my contingency resources that I've got documented in my burn plan are not available, am I following the burn plan, and am I following the Prescribed Fire Act? And then the other thing that one of the many other things that a burn boss has to do is to declare, an escape fire. If we have an escape and it becomes a wildfire, they have to report it as well. So those are, a couple of responsibilities of some key positions for a prescribed burn. So next, in the standards, we're gonna kind of highlight a couple other things here for, it states that the standards talk about escape prescribed burns. So there's a section in the standards that talks about escapes. It identifies, what's an escape, what we must do, and that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to read the whole screen there, but basically it says if a prescribed burn escapes our boundary and it can't be contained with the resources on hand or our contingency resources, then it's by definition a wildfire. So when, we look at that sentence where it says, outside of the burn unit. So there's a little bit of, we're open to interpretation for what is the burn unit. A few slides, I'm going to show you, some different things that we can do with that. More on contingency lines, maximum management areas, give ourselves some room to work. Because if you look at the last part of that slide, it says that we should expect that we are going to get fire outside of our perimeter. So the next one, talks about prescribed fires again. It's just continued. Once a prescribed fire has declared that there's a wildfire, the burn boss, they could become the IC, the incident commander of that wildfire. If that happens, I'm just gonna pose a question out, and you can all think. You don't have to answer it. I don't expect an answer because we're not at the question and answer part yet. But if you're the burn boss and there's an escape that's converted to a wildfire and you become the IC, the incident commander of the wildfire, who's taking care of the prescribed burn? So just because we have something else doesn't mean we forget what's in our back door. We've got to manage all of it. So that's, how that's going to play out should be, it should be pre-identified. During our briefings, during the burn plan, in our prep phases, we should be talking about that. If we get a wildfire, how is this going to, how's the organization going to play out? Who's going to do what? Because we're going to have to shift positions. Things are obviously changing. So if the burn boss becomes the IC, who's taking care of the burn? With that said, if it's documented and declared that it's a wildfire, now we're going to have suppression resources that are mandated to to do wildfire suppression, they're going to be involved. So could, the Bureau of Forestry, volunteer fire departments, federal agencies, whoever has wildfire suppression responsibilities. So how are we going to manage that when they show up, when they arrive on scene? We're going to have to do some transitions. How specifically we're going to do that transition, it's going to be dependent on the situation. One of the best things that we can do to help that transition is talk about it ahead of time. Talk about it with our partners ahead of time. Just so if it happens, we're not trying to figure it out while the fire's running away from us. And the one thing that I will mention, we're going to talk about volunteer fire departments a little bit, but just remember that even though they're a volunteer organization, the majority of them in the state are contracted by municipalities for fire suppression. So they also have a legal responsibility to do stuff, to take action. So in the standards under, continuing with the prescribed fires, so it talks about the district fire warden. So within the Bureau of Forestry, the district fire warden that has jurisdiction of wherever that wildfire occurs, they have to be notified. And the standards only mention the district fire warden specifically. So, and I was not part of the standards when they were written. I believe they were written this way to kind of, the district fire warden is sort of a catch-all. That once the district fire warden has been notified, then it's up to them to make sure any agency that needs to be in the know is in the know, whether it's, the fire departments, PEMA, whoever it happens to be. In my mind, the way it's written, it's a district fire warden's responsibility to make sure that whoever else needs to know, knows about it. And if you have anything you want to add, Jeremy, by all means. Jeremy's here to keep me on my toes. So now we're going to kind of switch gears and talk about the burn plan a little bit. So within every burn plan, the standards have identified that the burn plans have to have certain elements that are present in every burn plan. So I identified a few of them. There's obviously more elements that are required in the burn plan than these. One of them is the burn unit description. So within that description, we can have, a narrative of the description of what the burn unit should look like, get a picture in our mind by reading a paragraph. But you should also have some maps with that coincide with that description. Within those maps, and I'll show you an example here in a second, we should have our, where we plan to burn, and then our box, our maximum management area, our contingency lines, whatever is what area do we have to work with for this project. So the next, there has to be an element of a contingency plan. So within the contingency plan, we have to have maximum management points to talk about that, actions that are needed, contingency report, resources and reporting times, and wildfire conversion. So I want to highlight the contingency resources and reporting times. So I already mentioned, the burn boss has to make sure that our contingency resources are truly available. And I want to hit that again, just to, within the standards, it states resources that have an indeterminate availability are not contingency resources. So where I'm going with that is, I could have one of our maintenance divisions as listed as my contingency resource day of the burn. For whatever reason, they're unavailable. They could be going to a wildfire. something else may come up, their engine may break, whatever. Once that happens, once there's a change, I've got to replace that contingency resource. If I don't replace it, I'm not within my burn plan. And then I'd want to touch on fire departments. I've seen a lot of burn plans over the years, and I've written them, over the years where I've listed the fire department as a contingency resource, unless that fire department is committed to your project. I would argue that they are probably not a true contingency resource, because if they get, dispatched to a structure fire, vehicle wreck, whatever the case may be, they have other responsibilities in their coverage area. So unless they're going to commit, whatever you need, and 100% say they're going to be available, that, fire departments they may or they may not truly be available. And then the other part that I do want to highlight with the contingency plan piece of it is for all the burn bosses. So if you're a burn boss and you look at a burn plan, and you're looking at the contingency, element to it, and you're not comfortable with what's written in the burn plan, you've really got two options. You can either decline the assignment and not burn, or maybe talk to the agency administrator, explain your concerns, and maybe make an amendment to the plan. So and this is more geared towards the burn bosses, but if a burn boss is not comfortable with what's written in the plan, you can't just go with it. You've got to make some changes. So this is an example of a map of one of our prescribed burns. So the area shaded in orange, that is the area that we intend to burn. You'll see a black hashed line that circles around that's kind of it's kind of a big box. So the burn area itself is, I think, like 300 acres, just shy of 400 acres. I mean, if you look at the hash line around the outside of it, it's substantially larger than what we're intending to burn. That is what we've identified as our maximum management area. We picked those boundaries based on geographical features, roads, trails, things that are already in place that we can use to, if something gets out and gets established, we can realistically catch it with our on-hand resources and our contingency resources. If you notice, I'm not sure how well it shows up in the back, but there's some shaded colors in there. So the green area, that is our forest. The light pink area is an adjoining forest, but all of the white is private property. So the maximum management area line to the west, that's a road. It's an easy, it's a really good barrier that we can use in case we need it. Going up and around it, it's pretty much the same thing, but the southeastern corner, there isn't a clear defined barrier there. The reason that we put the boundary line there is because it's private property, and we do not want to include private property in our maximum management area. If we included the private property, we'd have to, we'd probably have to get agreements with all the property owners, and it would be a lot more cumbersome. I couldn't sleep at night knowing that I put somebody's private property in my boundary area. So that's just an example of, a maximum management area, or it could be a contingency line. It's a box outside of our burn unit that we can work to to catch any slop overs, any spot fires. So the next couple of slides are they're just some examples of what we have in one of our burn plans. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I did highlight a bullet there where it says if there's, it talks about if there's an escape. And what I want to point out with that is, it says if if it can't be contained with the resources that are on hand or our contingency resources, then it'll be declared a wildfire. The third bullet is, it just talks about operational periods, state forest land. But in a nutshell, if we can't extinguish that fire with our on-hand resources and our contingency resources, whatever they are listed, then it's a wildfire. I'll back up one slide. So with this example, if we did have an escape and we're comfortable that we could probably catch it with our on-hand resources and our contingency resources, but we're getting, maybe we're getting taxed, it's getting late in the day, we're getting tired. Just because we're using our on-hand resources doesn't mean that we still can't declare that a wildfire within our maximum management area. So, there's a lot of variables that come to that. If it's at the end of the day, maybe we're all tired and we're not as efficient at the end of the day. So maybe we need to declare it a wildfire just because folks are tired or, whatever reason. There's lots of different variables, but don't think just because it's still in that box that we can't declare it a wildfire. We can.
Real quick, I did want to say that declaring a wildfire isn't necessarily a failure. It's just taking a proactive response and getting more resources on hand. The other thing I wanted to highlight is in Brian's maximum management area here, we do have lease camps. That's okay as long as you have a plan for those to be handled or addressed, whether it be placing an engine there, having UTVs, hand lines. It's okay to have those in your maximum management area during this planning phase. And we often do because of how many lease camps we have on our forest.
So with this map, it's a little hard to see, but there are several blue triangles. Those are all state forest lease camps. So those are something else that we're going to have to contend with. And we're going to have to figure out how are we going to handle it. Next is just a continuation of that burn plan example. This just goes over what actions are we going to take. So this is where you would identify, this is what we're going to do. And then that's the last part of the actions that are needed. I did want to just, again, highlight on this for the number 4 section. If we can't contain the fire with on-hand or contingency resources, I've got to call the district and let the district forester know to convert it to a wildfire. So the next slide is still going along with an example of one of our burn plans is the resources and reporting times. I've written plans early on and I've kind of gotten away from it, where if you see what's highlighted there, I'm listing kinds, types, and quantities of contingency resources. I used to box myself into, we're going to use this division as contingency. Well, if that division is not available, that just completely voids my entire plan. So what we do now is we just write kinds, types, and quantities. We just need, one engine with 4 firefighters. And and most of the time our dozer is at the burn unit already, but if it's available, that's part of our contingency. Just gives you more flexibility. Then the next slide talks about the conversion part. So it just says, you know, who is going to declare the conversion. So the burn boss is going to declare the conversion. Number 2 there talks about the incident commander role. Who's going to assume the incident commander role? So, you know, the way we have it listed is the burn boss will do it unless otherwise noted at the briefing. So the day of the morning briefing, you know, that's one of the things that we'll talk about. Who is going to do what if this happens? And sort of a side note, one of the things that I always sort of think about as a burn boss is if for some reason, if I'm the only burn boss that's on site and for some reason I get stung by a bee, whatever, and I can't fulfill my burn boss duties, who's going to take over? So the next one, it just goes into conversion, you know, a little bit more, talks about the map, the maximum management area. Generally, we're using existing barriers. It's just a box that we're giving ourselves some room to work. This is an example of one of our organizational charts from one of the burns. I don't know if we did it this year or last year. So you know, on there it lists, you know, who's doing what job. And you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner, I have a red box there. So day of the burn, I've identified, okay, you know, we do need a Type 6 engine for people. So I make sure that those folks know they are contingency for us that day. Generally what happens with us is that's one of our maintenance divisions. They're our contingency resource, but they're also our initial attack resource. So if the district gets dispatched to a wildfire, and they have to go to that wildfire, then we have to reevaluate and backfill them. So with this organization as an example, so the burn plan for this unit required 18 people. And if you look at the numbers, you can count all the people on there. We actually have 5 extra. I usually try to build in extra people day of the burn, just so somebody gets sick or hurt or whatever, you know, we've got some flexibility. And it requires 2 Type 6 engines, and we've got an extra one on site. So if my contingency crew gets reassigned, gets dispatched to another fire, I could theoretically take what I've got on hand and reorganize and still meet what the plan says. But the only thing I'm gonna just give a caveat about using on-site resources for contingency. If we need those on-site contingency resources to hold our prescribed fire, then are they really contingent? Are they our backup anymore? If we need them for, you know, on the front line, are they our backup? So just is something to think about. I'm not opposed with contingency resources being on site, but if they get augured in and they're not truly our backup, then can we rely on them to go catch a spot fire? I think that was all I had on that. So that's pretty much the sort of the nuts and the bolts of converting to a wildfire. Just, you know, I wanted to highlight some of the, you know, what the Prescribed Fire Act and the standards say, give you a couple of examples of our burn plans. And now I'll let Jeremy talk about our wildfire.
So many of you have probably heard this story or parts of it. This was part of our LSR burn project with the Game Commission. This was only on DCNR land. We were trying to do our part before we linked up with them and did the west side of what you see up there. Brian had come down to help us with the burn. I wrote the burn plan, had a couple people look at it. That drainage in between where those 2 green dots are, that was rhododendron. Really flammable? No, not really. Downhill, didn't really think we would have any issues. We did pick a more aggressive day to burn this. One of our mitigating factors was we cut the unit in half. That bottleneck there in the center, we only wanted to burn that southern piece of it. It was about 40 acres. We actually pulled off the burn completely. It wasn't until the last little bit of ignitions where it actually jumped out of the box. We had a couple spot fires adjacent to the line, as one might expect spot fires slop over to look like. And I'm going to actually use the mic here, or the mouse here some too. But our real issue, oh, wrong button. Our real issue was it jumped the whole drainage. We had identified at briefing who was going to take over the wildfire, hence why I'm in front of you today. Being the fire forester for the district, I knew all the local resources. I knew my resources in district, and it just seemed like a better option. It was agreed that during the briefing that Brian would maintain the prescribed fire. Never thought we'd actually have to do that. It was just a formality that we were going through. I'm glad we had that plan, because at about 14:30, Brian looked directly at me and goes, convert to a wildfire. It was never a question. Actually, during this planning process for this talk, I don't think Brian even remembered looking at me and saying it, but we could see from the eastern side of that control line, which had a really good view to the other side, we could see flames.
So to tag on what Jeremy's saying, so if we're at the stage where we're going to convert to a wildfire, there's a lot going on. Things were getting busy. So if you've got to have other people helping you. The burn boss can't do it all. So for all the burn bosses in here, have your firing holding other folks, FEMOs, help be some more eyes for you. Because it's a lot. There's a lot going on. And as we were going through this, I told Jeremy, I said, honestly, I don't even remember if we truly declared a wildfire. It was an assumed thing because I told the district rep and he was in contact with the district office, but
it was clear cut. And I remember kind of jumping into UTV within about a minute of having that conversation. And I had to drive out to the State Route 144 and then back up. It was about a 10-minute drive to the other side if you weren't speeding or flying. But of course, we know how emergencies go. We had a dozer on site. We started immediately picking resources. Our dozer is part of our contingency. How we were going to start addressing. We had the issue of getting to our second TAC channel. Our guys are not great with the radios, and we're even better now with our new system. So we had all sorts of resources coming in of our own. And of course, we contacted 911, which DCNR has a part in that, but we're specifically requesting the fire companies. We were out of our depth at this point in the sense of an IA operational phase.
and
So-
one of the things Jeremy just mentioned during the morning briefing, we had pre-assigned radio frequencies. So
during that first hour, I think it's kind of all a little muddy. I had 2 radios in my lap and both cell phones operational. It was that kind of chaos. So being a burn boss and trying to handle that while you still have an active prescribed fire can be very cumbersome quick, let alone having a wildfire on your hands. This was my first larger wildfire. At one point, we had at least 15 fire companies on it, our district resources, 3 or 4 other district resources, and aircraft flying. That's all during the first operational period before 9 o'clock at night. Not something to be proud of, just showing you what reality looks like. We immediately assumed unified command. I'm going to tell you there's 20 different districts and they all operate a little differently. If this happens to you, I would highly encourage you to have that networking capability early so you know who you're going to be working with. We were using every resource we could, and we were still requesting more help. Unified command isn't always pretty. It's very clunky. We sent up a formal ICP, in which point I couldn't run operations. Being my first big fire, I didn't recognize this, and I still tried to run operations from ICP. It doesn't work so well, especially when you have resources that do want to refuse risk. At one point during the night, we were doing burnout operations, and we probably shouldn't have had guys burning in that steep a country at night. We should have waited till the morning. Something that I may have recognized if I was able to be mobile, but being tied to the fire company at ICP, it gets difficult. So breaking down ICS is something I learned from this incident, and utilizing those other players, whether it be operations, logistics, et cetera. There's plenty there. At one point we had news media. I don't want to focus too much on the operations end of this, but we did try and knife fight this for a bit. You see that one yellow and black line in the black? That's where we decided we were going to try and cut it off instead of just burning off the road. We did back out pretty quickly, had a dozer go down, all sorts of fun stuff. This was an extreme event. 700 acres, I would not expect on most escapes. But be that as it may, it could be immediately next to the line, and you could be in as much trouble as we were at the time. It immediately jumped our contingency line, but it can still do the same in your situation. So we relied on the fire companies, the aircrafts, and we knocked it down pretty quick. So Brian, would you like to add anything about that first operational period?
From my end, I thought it went very smooth, shifting resources around. And then I kept a handful back at the prescribed burn. We were handling both, you know, it was a lot of mental stress. I can say that. And I do remember when I come around the corner, Jeremy must have just got back around there and got eyes on the spot fire. I remember him very vividly calling me on the radio and said, I think I might want to order an air tanker. And I said, well, I think you better order 2. So, and that was within a matter of, I don't know, probably what, a half an hour of when the spot happened.
Yeah, it all happened very quickly, from the point of final ignitions to having a couple little spot fires or slop overs right next to the line. For those that can see the mouse, you can see this little spot that had gotten out. We were addressing that when one of our firefighters, I think it was our firing boss, looked across the ridge and saw the other side. It was nice and clear cut for us. It might not be so clear if anybody else finds themselves in that position. But at this time, any questions or to add in, Brian?
No, we'll open it up for questions, and if anything comes up afterwards, you know, hit us up at a break, or my contact information is there, Jeremy's is there, you know, shoot us an email, give us a phone call.